On this week's Back of the Grid, we're going to be picking apart the data from testing. We're going to be making some predictions for the season ahead and looking ahead to the first race of the 2024 season. Hello everyone, welcome to Back of the Grid. I am Chris, that's Stu.
Hi.
And that's Tom.
Hello.
That's a new way of doing it.
And that's an intro.
That's an intro.
It's only race week.
Yeah.
It is only race. Or if you're Ferrari, it's something like or something like that. Like they did a poster frame like that someone posted in the Discord, and it just like made the way the type was laid out was awful, and it made me have an aneurysm.
It reminds me of Don't Dead Open Inside from Walking Dead.
Yeah.
And that's how we start this season, gang.
Yeah. And
Rowie Seek, everyone. It sounds like some sort of, I feel like I should ring a bell when I say it. Rowie Seek. Ding.
Anyway, we've had testing. When the drain covers weren't falling off and causing red flags, which is I read an interesting theory on why that suddenly happened today. I mean, obviously someone hadn't done a good enough job of like securing the drain covers, but also someone was saying most of these cars seem to be much better at riding the curbs than previous seasons. So all the drivers were using way more curb and spending more time on drain covers and ripping them out of the floor. But that's by the by.
Well, it's an interesting topic because if that's going to happen, that's happened at Bahrain. Bahrain's not a circuit known for having loose drain covers in the past, right? Like, I feel like this is the first time.
I'm trying to remember where we were the year that someone did rip one out the curb.
There was one in Malaysia. First one I remember is Malaysia,
yes,
where it was a really bad one, and it just like
Grosjean,
absolutely.
Was
it was in a Haas. It was a
Lotus. Oh yeah, it was. Yeah, it was after that was Haas, wasn't it?
Yeah, but it was a while ago. It was a long time ago. Yeah. And then there was obviously the infamous Las Vegas one that happened to Sainz, and there's still ongoing inquiries with Formula One about like
Ferrari is still trying to get some money back.
Yeah.
But Russell in Baku when he was in the Williams as well.
Yeah, there was that one. Yeah, there was. So it has happened in the past, but like those are at kind of, obviously those are at street circuits, so you can kind of understand it a little bit more. I think for it to be happening at a race, a purpose-built race circuit, is potentially a bit more of an issue. It points to like these cars having much more hoovering effect in their way they produce their downforce, and it's obviously having an effect on. So it's sucking up. If you put a hole underneath, it's going to create a big vacuum underneath that drain and suck the cover off of it, clearly. So that's definitely something they're going to be you'd hope they will be heavily on the lookout. You would hope a memo would have gone out to every single circuit and been like, right, make sure everything's secure for when we arrive, because obviously these cars are producing much more suction than they were in the past. And I think that could be a root cause of this. And also, if they're riding the curbs more, then that's just going to compound it even further.
Yeah.
Can you all tell everyone that this was a really hard test session to draw any conclusions from? We're talking about drain covers.
That's what everyone wants us to talk about, drain covers.
I know, right?
It wouldn't be bad.
And everyone's moved on to the next thing that they want to do on the internet. No one's listening anymore.
Or maybe they are, and that's why they're here. For that exact kind of insight.
We are the next thing. We are the next thing on the internet.
The next big thing.
Don't know about that. Testing. Pretty hard to draw any massive conclusions. I've kind of grabbed our document's been edited multiple times, and it's now become the total guesswork one lap pace chart, and some very rough sort of race pace ideas. We'll kind of just go team by team and have some thoughts and try and figure it out, I guess. The thing almost everyone seems to agree on is that Red Bull look the best.
Well, there's two things we can agree on. I think Red Bull do look the best, but I wouldn't necessarily bet my house on it, but I think they do look the best. And I think I would bet my house on Alpine looking the worst. I think they look atrocious.
Oh boy, yeah, they had a rough one. Yes, so Red Bull, Perez actually only did the 5th fastest lap of the test. Verstappen did the 6th fastest lap, both on C3 tyres. They did the 3rd most laps of anyone. I suspect that car never ran with anything less than about a quarter tank of fuel, though. I don't think they ever ran that car. It certainly didn't look like a car that was running on fumes to put in a fast lap.
No, yeah. And also engine modes as well. There's no way they turned the engine up. When you you just have to look at how happy Max Verstappen looked with the car after he'd, he's the kind of guy that he's going to struggle to hide if he's upset, especially given how, drastically they developed that car, clearly. So, if it had all gone wrong, I think you'd know about it pretty quick. In Verstappen's interviews, I think he'd really struggled to hide his emotions. And in exactly the same way he struggled to hide his emotions, how happy you are. He's going to know, if that car feels better than it did last year, then...
Yeah,
he's got another championship on his hands, hasn't he? Yeah. That's what he's thinking.
They, as a team, they looked very calm and happy with how things went, which is always ominous. I don't think Ferrari are a million miles off them, though. In terms of one lap pace, most people seem to have them 3 or 4 tenths off. It kind of feels like Ferrari have, because they were always good over one lap last couple of seasons, it feels a bit like they've sacrificed a bit of one lap pace to improve their race pace, which they needed to do because for a few years now they've had a fast car in qualifying and then not generally had the race pace.
Well, yeah, what was it last season? Leclerc grabbed something like 5 poles, 6 poles, and Max won from all of them?
Or every single one of them, yeah.
Yeah.
And it had been like 10 over the last 2 seasons altogether. I think it had gotten to, and he'd only won one of them.
Yeah, so, when you talk across the last couple of seasons, part of the problem that Ferrari have is they're Ferrari.
now.
But even if they've got the fastest car, they're going to find some way of not winning races. You can just guarantee it.
Well, I think, without getting too into the weeds, I think strategically they weren't too bad at all last season. I think they made
definitely
massive improvements,
but there weren't as many tense fights though. I don't think last season. I think the few times they made the right calls. I think, but like they didn't have that many opportunities to cock up strategy last year. Whereas I feel like this year they'll have a lot more opportunity to cock up strategy.
Another Achilles heel people do seem to think they have improved is their tyre munching.
Yeah.
Leclerc, they never did a full race simulation, but Leclerc did a kind of 2-stint race stint where he was pretty damn close to Verstappen's race sim. And crucially, the tyre life seemed good. Like there wasn't massive drop off at the end of stints or anything. So
yeah,
I'm hopeful that Ferrari are going to be closer at the start of this year than they were at the start of last year. And they finished the end of last year, like having closed the gap quite a bit, and probably should have won in Vegas if not for a safety car. So promising signs, I think, from Ferrari.
I'm hopeful. From what I've
seen.
I
mean, the car looked good. It looked good on track. I have to say that it did look like a very comfortable. It looked more comfortable car to drive. But I think there's a fair few cars on the grid that look a lot more comfortable to drive this year than maybe they have done in the past. So it's just so hard to call any of this.
It feels like the next little group is McLaren and Mercedes, who are, I don't know, over the 3 days there were moments where it's like, oh, they've got this, and then the other, actually, no, terrible, Mercedes are faster. Oh no, McLaren seems to be faster. I think over one lap the McLaren probably looks better. Race pace wise, McLaren didn't have it. Like I think they only need one race sim again, but generally they didn't look great. In fact, Piastri's race sim was slower than Albon's and about on par with Ricciardo's, and it seemed to have a bit of a tyre munching issue. Again, we're only basing this off a single race sim they did, so there could be other factors. But I mean, it definitely looks like a better race car than they started last season with. We can say that for sure. And then,
does anyone have anything to add to that?
Yeah, McLaren are a
brief
weird
pause.
One. McLaren had some reliability issues as well. Like they were 9th of the 10 teams in terms of laps completed. I can't remember exactly what their issues were, but I spent a lot of time in the garage at one point.
Yeah. So okay, let's talk about the interesting things about these two teams. Are we talking just Mercedes? Are we talking McLaren?
We'll cover both because they seem to be they seem to be around at a similar pace. There's more interesting things to say about Mercedes, I think.
Yeah, I think so. From what I saw, McLaren didn't really. I mean, the development they brought. I don't think are ever going to set the world on fire. I think it is a sort of a mild evolution. Looks like of last season's car. I can't see anything on the top surfaces of the car that looked that much different from last year. Maybe I'm wrong. Some keyboard warrior will surely get me if I have, so that's fine. Obviously, all of the interesting stuff happens underneath the car with these cars anyway, and if they have developed that, then fair play to them. I think something interesting that I did hear one of the commentators say, I think it might have been Anthony Davidson maybe, mentioned that, and it's a dynamic that I haven't really thought about that much up until I heard him say it, and I've come up with my own analogy for this as well, but when you think about, I'm going to go off tangent a little bit here. When you think about a rocket taking off and going up into the air, when it reaches max Q, so that's the maximum aerodynamic pressure as it speeds up through the atmosphere, you have to think of it more of as like a piece of spaghetti going through the air. It's no longer it's not an infinitely rigid object. No object can be infinitely rigid. So when it's moving through the air really, really fast, it sort of wibbles. And the same thing can be said for the skin, if you like, of a Formula One car, the surfaces along a Formula One car, including underneath a Formula One car. And that's where I think a lot of people don't realize that that's where the real magic is happening with the downforce that these cars are creating underneath. It's the way the carbon is layered over the top of itself to flex in different ways to create different pressures in the air as it runs underneath the car, and that's how they're able to manipulate the air and create these astronomical levels of downforce that they're creating with the underbody. So you could take endless photos of the geometry of the beneath of one of those cars, copy it exactly, but if you don't get that layering of the carbon exactly the same, then it won't be as effective. It won't do the job as well. It'll do. Obviously, it'll still be effective to a degree, but if you don't have that same flexibility in the same spots, then you're not going to get the same performance from it.
Which is basically invisible.
Yeah, it's an absolute secret that it's so easy for the teams to keep because it's impossible to make out using imagery. So, and that I think is where Red Bull have got a real advantage over everyone else, and it's just absolutely baked in. No one's ever going to be able to sort of figure, unless you can get hold of their floor and do all kinds of sensor tests on it, then you're never going to be able to figure it out.
Unless you have insight into Adrian Newey's brain.
All that, yeah. So, McLaren, obviously McLaren have got their own things going on there, and it could be that McLaren have hiding a lot of pace. I think all the teams. I don't think any of the teams, other than maybe one or two, have really thrown down anything like a gauntlet. I think I don't even want to put any guesses in. I mean, this pace chart for me is just fantasy. I don't think it represents anything rigid at all. I don't think it has any true representation of what the standings what the current order is in Formula One. No offense, Chris. I know you've gone to a lot of effort to
I mean, I've just taken from elsewhere.
So yeah, McLaren. I haven't during testing. I haven't seen anything special. I don't think from them so far. But they could have been hiding it. It could be that we get to Bahrain on. Let's not forget on Thursday and Friday, and the race is actually, for those of you, we should have done a public service announcement at the very beginning of this saying that the race is on Saturday, because Formula One have done a terrible job so far of pointing out to the world that they've moved everything forward by a day.
Even the commentators didn't seem entirely sure what the calendar was like during testing.
Didn't have a clue. Half of them didn't even know. Anyway, that's by the by.
It's a good job they're already there, really.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, McLaren, they could have something up their sleeve. I think Mercedes, from the outside, have got more interesting things going on. I think I've said time and time again that Mercedes suspension has not been good enough. It's not been well developed enough for them to compete. And it finally looks like they're doing much more interesting things with their suspension. There was the whole thing with their render that I think someone commented like last week, maybe mentioning something vague about this, but I don't know if we were quite on the same page. But they have like an adjustable, I think it's the the rear element of the upper front wishbone can be adjusted to be about 3 centimeters in height difference,
which is
it's a huge amount
in terms of suspension adjustments.
Yeah, you normally expect millimeters. Really, you're looking at like no more than a centimeter of adjustment.
Yeah,
and they've got a whole panel there on the bodywork that can sort of be. I'm guessing that it's on a slider and you can move it up and down at your discretion to within any tolerance, whatever tolerance they've built into it. And I think you'd obviously have your different shrouds to cover it on that panel, depending on which setting you've gone with. So that's a really, really interesting innovation for Mercedes. I think it gives them a huge opportunity to have a much, much, much bigger setup window for their car. And you can see that's where the development appears to have gone, is to, making their car, making it easier for them to set up a race car for a race weekend, give their drivers the opportunity to exploit that car to the maximum. So that's what's interesting with Mercedes for me.
With these ground effect cars, sort of overall stability and anti-dive and things like that are vital. And that's what Red Bull have been. Like Adrian Newey said when these rules came in, straight away he was like, the effectiveness of your floor is a bit of a red herring. The thing that's going to make the difference is the stability of the platform. And being able to make that suspension adjustment potentially means circuit by circuit, they will be able to change that suspension geometry to make the anti-dive and things like that, give them a more stable platform, which is really promising for them.
It's that particular point of suspension has a very big effect on the anti-dive of the front of the car. And what they're doing is they're giving themselves the flexibility to adjust the amount of dive that is imposed on the car under braking at any particular point. It makes you wonder if they've got a similar facility at the rear of the car as well. I wonder if, obviously it's impossible to see, and you just wonder if they've thought of that for the front of the car, then why would you not implement the same adjustability on the back of the car? So it'll be interesting to see over the course of the season whether that comes out, whether anyone notices sort of different mounting points for the rear suspension as well. For me, it's an exciting thing for Mercedes, because that is the absolute, that's the thing that's been killing them for the last 2 years, I think, is suspension geometry.
Yeah, the suspension base is just, after the initial concept was clear it wasn't going to work, that base that they had, there was no way to adjust to something else, was there? They've had to go back to Route 1, essentially.
Yeah.
Redevelop a base that has this kind of flexibility to it from a setup point of view, and practically start again. And I think there was a big element of, obviously, last year understanding that and essentially favouring to working towards what they've got now.
Yeah,
which looks somewhere more on the lines of actually being able to compete with Ferrari like it should have. Like they should be able to.
You can almost see the thought process, because last year they moved their suspension from being sort of like a few centimeters down the chassis to like basically resting across the top of the chassis, joined up with like a bar. And you can almost imagine the person designing it thinking, hang on a minute, what if we could have some variability here and have some different positions along the chassis where we can decide where we want these to mount and make this an adjustable part of the car rather than just relying on, heave springs and all your other bits and bobs that you'd usually use for suspension. Why not give ourselves that extra bit of adjustability, which they've shown that kind of innovation in the past with the dual axis steering where they could arrange the toe. So the smarts are there for them to come up with these things, and they're finally able to implement them, I guess.
It almost feels like an evolution of the thinking that came up with DAS, doesn't it? Like it's how can we turn this thing that normally you set it and send the car out into a thing that we can actually... I mean, you don't have to adjust the suspension on the move, but it's still giving you another point of adjustability around that front setup.
Yeah, it's to do with obviously turning up a track that's got a completely different geometry to it and being able to... I mean, you've only got to look at the teams that struggled with the adjustment to circuits that needed a higher ride height. Like...
Exactly.
This is born of, what was it? Texas disqualifications. That is where
it's possible. That's been a factor.
It's not just that, but it's born of those kind of issues. Is what I'm getting at. Not specifically that scenario, but the scenario of trying to find a way to make the car adjustable enough to suit these different kinds of circuits that we visit, whilst not compromising performance throughout those different setups, which is something that
within the regulations, obviously.
And obviously within your regulations, like something that Red Bull, where it was clear that having to run higher was slowing the Red Bull down somewhat compared to its normal pace, but it had been developed in such a way that it could run at those higher ride heights and still be competitive, basically. And I think that's what the likes of Ferrari and Mercedes have tried to essentially compete with for this season, is finding a way to be adjustable enough to find that balance between floor performance and suspension performance across the multitude of circuits that we visit.
Yeah. And it gives you hope because it shows you that Red Bull. It shows you that Red Bull aren't the only people innovating in Formula One. There are teams up and down the grid that are all coming up with interesting concepts for Red Bull to copy next year and get even faster. So
they're not all just copying last year's Red Bull.
Well, this is it. Like they're not all just. Just look at the Red Bull. Who are Red Bull going to copy? Well, they'll copy Mercedes. There's an argument to say. They're not copying Mercedes. It's actually like a T arrangement, isn't it? It's not just like a vertical thing. So we can throw the Mercedes copy out the window.
And there's already people saying, "Oh, Red Bull gonna evolve into a zero pod design," but there's already pictures of that car with the engine cover off, and that bodywork is full of stuff. Like you can't just delete the side pods on that. No. They're full of cooling and all sorts.
Full of things. Yeah.
Yeah. Worth mentioning with Mercedes as well, they didn't actually do a race sim all tests, so tough to know exactly where they really fit in race pace.
Did they not?
Nope. They did like long runs, but they never did like a proper race sim come in and do pit stops.
Oh man, it's just so hard to tell where everyone is, isn't it? I've never known it so difficult to tell. Normally in the years we've been doing this, there's normally been at least a vague emergence of a pecking order. Yeah. And to me this year it just feels tough. Really, really, really tough, really vague this year.
Let's do Aston Martin next. They were weirdly anonymous the whole test. They did in terms of lap times, they were sort of in the middle-ish, fourth most laps. Over one lap, generally, they maybe seemed a bit slower than McLaren and Mercedes, but then Alonso did a race sim that looked really good. So hard to tell.
I think watching that car go around track, that to me looked like a particularly nice car to drive.
Very stable.
It looks stable, yeah.
Yeah, I think once again, I think Aston have got something this year. I think they're keeping their cards very, very close to their chest.
Their fastest times were on harder tyres for the most part, weren't they? The fastest times that both drivers' output were on C3s rather than C4s. So the only team, I think, outright faster than them was Red Bull. Like everyone else was like maybe one or the other driver, but not both.
Yeah.
Red Bull was the only team to do faster times on C3s as their fastest time. So again, being testing and the way that it works, not a whole lot you can read into that, but I think there is something there that, you know, they're on C3s and a lot of the teams kind of beneath them or around them were either slower on the same tyre or on a softer tyre and still slower. So yeah, it's an interesting one because I'm trying to think who else ran them. There was McLaren. McLaren was sort of, this is where the McLaren to Aston Martin comparison, I guess, comes in, isn't it? Because there's elements where the McLaren looks better than the Aston and areas where the Aston looks better than the McLaren. So might be a little bit of back and forth between them, I think, going into these early stages of the season, at least from what the minimal bits that you can take from testing. I would say that Alonso is probably going to be mixing it with those two to some degree fairly early in the season, I would say.
Yeah, I reckon they're quicker than that. I think they're going to be up
Aston
there.
or McLaren?
Aston.
I think McLaren had a good base coming into this, though. I think what they had from the end of last season, although what they've done to it is fairly modest, it's a kind of, well, don't fix what ain't broke of thing. It's got to be gradual.
Last year, wasn't it?
So So I think that there's a bit of cards close to the chest from a McLaren point of view, as there is with a lot of the teams. So I can see Alonso giving Norris and Piastri a run for the money and vice versa going into these first few races.
Yeah, my suspicion at the moment is that Ferrari, obviously Red Bull will look the fastest. I think Ferrari are going to be not that far behind them, and then your McLaren, Mercedes, Aston group is just too close to call, I think, at the moment. And potentially Minardi snapping at their heels as well. That
did look like an okay car, didn't it?
Can we just call Minardi the team without a name? Because RB officially doesn't actually stand for anything. RB, they've said themselves, it's just RB. It stands
for RB.
It stands for RB. So it means nothing. It's a meaningless, it's a team without a name.
I think one of their bosses actually said in an interview, originally it did stand for Racing Bulls, but we dropped that, but we decided RB just sounded nice, so it's just RB.
So yeah, it's a team without a name then.
An exercise in how to not brand your Formula One team.
Yeah. Look decent though.
It looks decent.
It did look decent.
I think
reasonably midfield.
I almost wonder if they were holding back a little bit because they know the second they show some pace, they are going to get protested to hell. Because all the other teams around them are ready to complain about the way that team is set up and their closeness to Red Bull now. So
I noticed something interesting that I don't know how much I read into this and how much I don't, but I was on LinkedIn of all places the other day and I saw that team advertising for tons of jobs based in Italy, based out in where they've always been based. And it makes me wonder how much is actually staying out there. Because all the jobs that were listed were saying that they were based there. And it was just like a really throwaway thing that I happened, just like literally doing my daily LinkedIn check as I do and happened to see these jobs. And I thought,
were they engineering type jobs or?
There were all sorts. They weren't necessarily, I don't think they were more entry level jobs, I must admit, like the kind of things that they were advertising. But they were across the board.
Probably because that's why all the good people have moved to Milton Keynes now. So they've got a load of vacancies in Italy.
So that it makes me wonder, like, is there an element here of like Red Bull obviously poaching people that are doing a good job at the team formerly known as, and they're now having to recruit to replace them as well?
Well, that would be natural, wouldn't it? If you own two teams, that team was always the junior Red Bull team. So you would promote in theory, you'd promote your best. I mean, look at what they do with drivers. Well, in theory, what they have. The point was to get young drivers in that team, and they eventually find their way to Red Bull, which historically has been the case. So why should it be any different with
Yeah.
Yeah, so for very, very quick
Stuff.
context, there's like jobs as garage technicians, aerodynamics. So aerodynamics is based in the UK, but then the technician stuff, like the on-site technician stuff, is based in Italy.
Interesting.
Composite
Well, that's
designer
also a lot of that stuff as well. Is stuff that
in Italy.
they, the mechanical things they share a platform with Red Bull now, right? Like the suspension, gearbox, a lot of the components are Red Bull components. So
Yeah.
you don't necessarily need anyone to be designing a whole new suspension. You just need technicians to adjust the suspension and put it together and take it to bits whenever
true.
whenever they need to. So
It looks to me like there's going to be some sort of hybrid for them, and that it's probably some sort of float in the rules, the line of the rules where it's only so much they're going to get away with being alongside the Red Bull stuff.
I mean,
don't
they
know.
are still an Italian team, so there has to be
Yeah.
surely more than 50% of the team has to operate out of the country or registered.
well, who knows? Who
I mean,
knows?
you say that, but Red Bull are registered as an Austrian team.
No, that's true. Actually, so
Yeah.
it's meaningless.
Um,
This is where the money comes
also,
from.
this could all just be like a whole ruse. Like it could be, let's just put a load of jobs up. Just because the jobs are there doesn't mean they have to make the hires.
There is that.
Like,
There is that.
There's just the factory there in Italy, and they just pay people to walk in there every day and walk out to make it look like it's an operating factory.
it's just a massive server farm for CFD.
Who should talk about next? Williams. Williams, in what was a test of very good reliability, Williams probably had the worst of that. They did the least laps of anyone.
Yeah.
But I mean, when it worked, it looked
all right.
Looked all right. Definitely looked, at the very least, like they have carried on from the progress they made towards the end of last season. I think it's got some aerodynamic bits on it that are interesting and unique to the Williams, which I suppose
the front wing,
is the
front wing wedge things.
Yeah. And that feels like the rules around wind tunnel testing and CFD in action. Like they have some interesting bits on that they've had time to do some more experimental stuff around, I suppose, because they are towards the bottom end of the standings the last couple of years. But yeah, shame about the reliability. Shame Logan Sargent had one of the only spins of the entire test, I think.
Well, he had the most spectacular off of anyone, didn't he? He was sort of like
did.
Straight across the gravel, almost into the barrier. Was he in the barrier? He wasn't in the barrier, was
Not
he?
quite.
No
Not
one
quite.
in the wall for the whole
No
test.
one in the wall. No, barely a red flag. The only red flags were for the track.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then probably behind them, Sauber, Haas, and Alpine. Sauber and Haas have not got a whole lot to say about. They just looked kind of slow.
They looked really, barely average, didn't they? They looked better than Alpine, but no. I mean, Haas spent a lot of time. Did an entire. I don't think they did a fast run. Haas. I don't think they did a performance run at all. They spent their entire time concentrating on long runs and getting on top of their tire issues that they've had, because they've had a reasonably okay qualifying car, but an absolutely shocking car when it comes to tire deg and the race. So I think they've been really focused on solving those issues. You wonder about the center of gravity of that car, whether like maybe in the past maybe like they've had the fuel tank too high or something, and that's just like putting too much wear into the tires. I know Mercedes had their fuel tank in that in the first season of this era of rules, the fuel tank was basically behind the driver's head. And it meant that over the course of the race, the tire deg would be quite high at the beginning of the race, but as the fuel burnt off, it had become less and less, much more kind of disproportionately to the rest of the grid. So they were always really, really much quicker than maybe you'd expect them to be towards the end of a race, because the deg was so high at the start of the race, because that fuel's just sloshing around, like dragging the car everywhere with it. And you wonder if that's the issue that, or a similar issue, a center of gravity issue maybe, is something that might have been affecting the Haas's.
But they did more laps than anyone else, which is good because it feels like they're normally one of the teams towards the bottom of that list. So if nothing else, they seem to have built a reliable car. But then again, everyone seems to have these lap counts are so much higher than you used to get. Like, the reliability these days is unbelievable.
But that's a good thing. It means they're not,
great,
it means they're not smashing through parts and being all wasteful. Like the things they build are built to last and they work. So, and I think that's an effect of what these, the penalty rules around making components, engine components, bits and bobs last much longer. That is a direct product. This is a direct product of that set of rules, I think, and it's a good thing.
Yeah. Which leaves us with Alpine, the other team that didn't complete a race sim for the whole test, but the general consensus seems to be that is not a good race car. It was what's the German publication called? I can never remember.
Auto and Motorsport.
That's the one.
Yeah.
Their headline said, or their description said something like, it's not fast over one lap. It's not got good race pace. It's overweight. It's draggy. It's like just all the negatives you could think of. Jolyon Palmer said he was like watching it go around the corners, and it looked like every time the car arrived at a corner, it surprised the driver with what it did. Like, there was just no consistency in the way the car behaved.
It's not a fun car to be in, I don't think, is it?
It looks like a real dog. Like, there's a genuine chance that could be the slowest car for these first couple of races.
Put some more paint on it, though, over the course of testing.
Oh, good. Maybe they're trying to balance out the weight a little stroke of paint at a time.
Yeah. God, that's some like very specific balancing, isn't it?
That team just baffles me, though. Like,
the money.
Maybe that's what they were waiting for. Learn where the balance issue is and then put the paint on the areas where they need the ballast.
But like, the money and the personnel and the drivers that team has, and they just continue to do nothing with it. Like, how many times have they said, like, oh, the new 100 race plan starts now? Like, looks like they need a new 100 race plan starting starting in Bahrain.
As Wes has just pointed out in the chat, saying good thing they canned Otmar. Obviously, he's being sarcastic, but it does genuinely feel like there's an element of, since they got rid of him, it's just got even worse. Like, he was probably one of the key people actually holding it somewhat together.
Oh, Otmar's probably sat at home watching testing, just laughing himself.
Rubbing his hands together, laughing. Yeah. Can't wait for this to play out. Yeah.
And that's all the teams. Any further thoughts on how things look, what we're expecting?
I would not want to embarrass myself by making any. I mean, we're about to make a load of predictions, but right now I can't. I can't make any serious predictions about Bahrain and about how the season's going to go. I think we're going to find out in just a few days. In less than 5 days, like 4 days now. Like Friday qualifying is this week, so I'm excited to see where everything does shake out, because obviously as soon as the timer starts for qualifying, that's when it's business time, and we're all gonna sort of take the sandbags out and have a look at what each of us brought to the party.
And I think there were a lot of sandbags in this test.
It feels like no one really sent it.
The only one that really feels like they showed their hand is Zhou popped up with like the fourth fastest time of the test on the last day. And no one for a second believes that car is the third or fourth fastest car. That definitely felt like a glory run. Yeah. But that was kind of it. Like, no one else seemed to really...
I'm a little bit worried that the Mercedes run at the end with Russell, that they felt maybe like they could have been possibly a bit glory runny, which is concerning.
Yeah.
But as long as, my let's not talk about expectations. Let's talk about hopes. And my hope is, I have hope upon hope that Perez shows up, B, that Ferrari show up, and C, that the rest behind are not as far behind as they have been, so they can be in the mix and at least make things interesting. If only during qualifying make things. I mean, qualifying last year actually wasn't terrible. Qualifying was arguably the more exciting part of the season across the year. So if they can just get that little bit closer and just make things difficult for Red Bull, don't let them walk it again, then I will continue to watch Formula One if that's the case.
Shall we do some season predictions then? We do this most years now. We sort of, this time of the year, we'll all do a few predictions of sort of starting at things we actually think will happen and getting increasingly bold as we go on. I've got a few ideas in mind.
Yeah.
I've got
how many
some-
are we doing? How many
Do
are we
one
doing?
each. Do three each. Do
Three each.
a dead cert, a less of a dead cert, and a ridiculous prediction.
Okay.
Okay.
Who wants to go first?
I'll give you what I think is my fairly certain one.
Go on.
Alpine won't score a point for 8 races or more.
Ooh, that's really similar to one I had, which I won't do now. I had as an idea that Alpine won't get a top 5 finish all season. But I like yours more.
Well, there you go. There are two. That's two Alpine based.
No, I'm going to do a different one. I don't want to have another Alpine one. Instead, I will say, I'll keep it simple. 3 teams will win a race. At least 3 teams will win a race.
Okay.
That's a good one. I like that one. My one is also simple. Red Bull will be at least on the podium at every single race.
Yeah, that's good. Like that.
Okay. Now we need to do a slightly less likely one
Slightly less likely.
before going to complete fantasy. I'm going to say that... Ooh, this is... Okay. By midway, at least 2 drivers in the top 3 won't be Red Bulls. So only one, like at least 2 of the top 3 drivers at halfway won't be a Red Bull driver.
Are you saying midway mathematically or summer break?
How does it fall?
I actually don't know when the summer break is this year.
Let's go summer break. Let's go
August.
summer break. Let's go summer break. So at
Means
summer
after
break, the top 3 drivers will have at least 2 drivers that aren't in a Red Bull. I'll write that out in a list.
Oh, so you think Perez is going to drop off, basically?
I didn't say that specifically. That's you putting words in my mouth. I said,
Well, it's not
at
going to be
least-
Verstappen, is it?
At least 2 drivers won't be in a Red Bull.
That's
two of the
also really
perceived top 3 drivers. Yeah, okay.
That's also extremely similar to one I was thinking of. So I'm going to have to change that again now.
Well, this is the power of going first, Chris.
Yeah.
What was your one that I've come very close to?
I was going to say the top 3 in the Drivers' Championship will all be from different teams.
I mean, yeah, it's similar. Not quite the same, but it's similar.
Yeah. Okay, instead, something slightly less likely. I will say for my less likely one that... Stu, you go next.
I've
Yeah,
got
you
one.
go next.
Both Mercedes and Ferrari will win more than one race. That's my next.
Both of them will win more than one
Yeah,
race.
both teams will win more
Okay.
than one race. Yeah,
Okay.
I'll write that in. Come on, Chris.
Come on, Chris. You've got to go your second one now because I've got to give you my complete fantasy one.
Lewis Hamilton will get at least one more win before he leaves Mercedes.
Okay, that's a fair. Are you ready for my
One
wild one?
Hamilton win. You're predicting at least one Hamilton.
At
win.
least one Hamilton win. Okay. Are you ready for my wild one?
Yeah.
Give us the wild one.
I'm trying to think of the best way of wording it. Okay. How many races total have we got this season? I'm trying to put a number on this.
24.
Okay, so Carlos Sainz will mathematically still be able to win the title with 4 races to go.
Okay.
That's.
Yeah.
I don't think that's that bad. I don't think that's like such a sort of out there prediction.
What I was going to say
this year?
is, I don't know if that's quite how I wanted to word it originally. Basically, my original thought in my head was Carlos Sainz will still be a legitimate title contender with at least 4 races to go.
Okay, that's I like that.
That's what I'm
good.
getting
I
at.
think it. I don't know. That's a very difficult thing to predict. So
Yeah.
and especially given we've just got no clue how close the season's going to be. I hope you're right, Tom. I really, really, really.
Me
hope
too,
you're right,
because then I don't have to burn my 55 Sainz Ferrari cap as soon as I would have thought.
I won't begrudge you those points at the end of the season if you've got that right. Out there prediction. Now, obviously, there's a silly season approaching. So part of me is like, do I do make some crazy predictions about the Mercedes seat?
I'll add a caveat to mine that goes with it because it's Carlos Sainz caveat, and we'll have also pre-signed for Audi.
Oh, for Audi. Okay, that's good. That's an interesting one.
I also had a driver. I'm guessing you're thinking of the Mercedes seat, Stu.
I was, but now
this
I'm
then?
not so
Because
sure.
I'd also got one on my shortlist. So how about we'll all do a bonus prediction? Who's going to replace Hamilton?
Okay, we'll do that as a bonus. Oh, that means I've got to come up with a whole nother prediction now.
Okay, I've got a wild one while you're thinking.
Go on then. You might prompt me into thinking of mine.
My last wild one is that Daniel Ricciardo will get a podium.
Ooh, that's not a bad one. That's good. I like that.
Okay, my wild one is Fernando Alonso will lead the championship at some point.
Ooh, I like that.
Nice.
That's very good.
Nice.
And then we need to predict who's going to take Hamilton's seat. In the bonus section of predictions, who will take Hamilton's
bonus
seat?
round.
Do
either of you have anything ready to go? Because I do, if not.
I do. I have mine ready to go.
Okay.
I have mine ready to go.
Yeah, I've gone first on everything. You guys can go before me and we'll see.
Go on, Chris,
I'm going to say Alex Albon.
Stu? Are you going to say the same thing?
Oh, you're so wrong.
Okay, Stu's going completely different. Go on, Stu.
Kimi Antonelli. I think he's going to do it.
Okay, that was Stu that said that, not me.
Yeah, that wasn't you.
That wasn't me.
That was me.
Just checking. I know we're both pretty northern, but come on.
We can tell our own voices from the other person.
I mean, I was going to say the same thing as you, Chris. I think that even if Antonelli has a good year, I think that there will be some sort of deal reached with Williams and they'll sneak away Albon briefly and maybe loan them Antonelli to let him get used to being in Formula One.
Interesting.
So you're saying Albon as well?
Yeah.
I'm surprised no one said Alonso. Alonso's been quite vocal about that seat. I think he fancies a bit of Mercedes Works team, but I guess he'll make his mind up after Bahrain.
We'll get to a point soon where Alonso is driven for every team on the grid. We can't be far off that, realistically, as well.
Maybe that's the new target he'd set himself. He tried to do the what's it called? The Indy 500 Le Mans Monaco. God, I'm blanking.
Yeah,
what's that called?
The Grand Slam.
The Triple Crown.
The Triple Crown.
Triple Crown, yeah. He's now got his own version of it where he just drives every team.
You can tell we're all getting older, can't you? Because no one can remember anything anymore.
Yeah. And all the references we make are so dated.
Yeah, well, yeah. I'm surprised we haven't done a rankings board for this. a tier league.
Now.
I can't even think of words
Tier
anymore.
maker.
It's been a long off
maker.
season.
Should we move on to Bahrain?
Yeah.
Storylines. Do we
I
have
say
any?
move
Are
on.
there storylines? Can we come up with any? I mean, one interesting storyline could be: will Christian Horner still be in a job by the time we get to Bahrain? I think it's safe to sort of talk about at least the speculation about what's happening. So,
was there a deadline to the internal stuff? I feel like it was like the end of
Well,
February.
they've said by the end of, but they've said now Ford have sort of piped up that they've said that they want to have it solved by the start of the season, so by Bahrain.
Okay.
The press today have been saying that they're expecting a resolution tomorrow or Wednesday. So by the time you listen to this, we might already know the outcome of it.
Yeah, so that's one storyline to take you into the season opener. What else we got? Obviously, just the pecking order. Well, finally, having had such a confusing cloak and dagger, so many unknowns. I think in this testing season this year, we'll finally get to see who's got the goods and who hasn't, whose ideas have worked, whose haven't, which drivers have got the legs on their teammates early doors, who's going to come out of the blocks like a greyhound, scolded greyhound, and who isn't. So, yeah, I'm excited for that. And then if I was to think of one more, can you guys think of any storylines for?
I think the interesting one is going to be working out where the team formerly known as fit.
That's what I was going to say.
That's the interesting bit for me to look out for is as teams start showing true pace in practice and going into quali and stuff like that, we'll start to see where they end up. And I think that there'll be, from what I can see and what you can gather from testing, I think that there'll be strong Q3 contenders early on, which is very good for them considering where they were last season.
Yeah. Because as you said,
going to ruffle some feathers.
Regardless of how they may have achieved it, at least it's a good thing for the sport that they're up there mixing with the other teams to some degree.
Yeah, you do want more teams to be competitive, don't you? So
for sure.
Yeah.
As long as it's not a copy of last year's Red Bull, which it doesn't, to be fair, on the top of it, but I mean the top surfaces don't really matter. Like I keep saying, it's the bottom series surfaces underneath the car and how they interact with the air and how they flex. So, and they'll know how to layer the carbon.
Yes, they will
to make it work. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see how that one plays out. I think that's it. I think we need to do some predictions, guys.
Let's do some predictions.
Yeah. Right. So, for those of you who are new to us this season, you may not be aware, but we host a predictions league, which you can get involved with on our website at backofthegrid.com. The premise is fairly simple. We ask you to predict the fastest person in Q3, the winner of the race, the first person out of the race through DNF, the number of finishers, and then we will pick one random driver through Chris's random selection tool, and we will predict their finishing position. It's always worth getting involved throughout the season because even though we do have a season-long table and then a winner at the end of it, an ultimate champion, we do have prizes every single race weekend if you manage to get 5 out of 5. So it's always worth getting involved. If you want to find out more, there's a little bit something like kind of the rules about what counts for what, all that kind of stuff. It's all covered on there. So head to backofthegrid.com. By the time you're hearing this, there will also be some links up to our Grid Rival Fantasy League, which we've done for the last couple of seasons. So there'll be a link for that. For that, the old league kind of restarts. So if you were in it last season, in theory, you should be in it automatically again. But if you want to re-enter under a new team or you're new to it, you can click that link and join there. And then same with the F1 league. We will be setting one of those up, which, again, by the time you're hearing this, will be in the fantasy section, one for each league. So click on those if you want to join either of those.
All right.
So let's make our predictions, boys. The most difficult one of the season, probably by far. Anyone want to be the guy that goes first for fastest in Q3?
I think it's I think it's going to be Max Verstappen. I'm going to put my money where my mouth. Well, am I putting my money where my mouth is? I don't know, but I think it is Max Verstappen. Okay,
Chris, anything from you to add to that?
I think it's going to be Charles Leclerc.
Okay, and that makes me feel less naive by saying Carlos Sainz.
Ooh.
So
I would love a Carlos Sainz World Championship. That is the narrative I am here for. He's losing his seat and he wins the World Championship for Ferrari. That is my dream.
I'd have been up for it anyway, regardless, but the circumstances he has found himself in just make it that much more appealing to me this season.
Now there's
than
this
usual.
narrative of like, will Hamilton be the one to go to Ferrari and like get them the championship? And Carlos is
Imagine,
like,
imagine.
I'm still here, guys.
Yeah, I'm here for the Schadenfreude. That's what I want.
love that.
Ferrari.
I
I
absolutely
live
love that.
for Ferrari Schadenfreude.
Yeah.
The question is, can Ferrari actually win it?
I'm going to say
Tom's already
no.
written Verstappen down.
Yeah, I'm going to say no on that part. And as much as it will be an amazing start to the weekend for Ferrari, I think Verstappen will come out on top on race pace, and Ferrari will either have not quite cracked the race pace fully yet. Maybe the Deg thing will creep back in a little bit, or just a poor decision. But in some way, Verstappen will end up winning that race, I believe.
Chris?
I'm going to stick my neck out and say Leclerc.
Ooh, a double let.
Chuck McClure, you're putting your money where your mouth is. Okay. I'm going to go, I'm going to go inverse to Tom.
Ooh,
And I'm going to say Sainz for the win.
I like it. I'd take that. Especially with my other predictions for the season-long stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I might lose that. But I think I will do this year. I think I will do a fantasy league, an F1 fantasy league this year. I didn't do it last year because it was too stressful. Because I get so busy that it is really difficult for me to keep track sometimes.
I did a terrible job of keeping up last year.
I think this last 2 years in it, and the year before I didn't do it because I was working for F1, and I'd have to do my predictions league right at the busiest point of my weekend, like between practice 3 and qualifying.
Yeah,
it just made it really difficult to sort of do all my work and do a predictions league. So it kind of it had to drop off. The thing I had to do my job and not worry about doing predictions. But yeah, this year I think I'm ready to come back to it.
Look, if Stu can talk himself into it, anyone can.
Yeah.
Backtogrid.com.
First DNF then.
First DNF. Who hasn't been first yet?
Me.
This Stu. Well, Stu, it's on you this one.
Who will be the first DNF? I think it's going to be a team that's not had as much mileage of others. It's possible that there could be some technical gremlins. I think McLaren could be a candidate for some technical gremlins early doors in the season. So I'm going to go Piastri.
Wow, how dare you? As resident McLaren super fan, I disagree.
I mean, I don't want it, but I know you don't. That's going to be my prediction.
It just hurts me that you're going there so soon. I'm going to go with one of the Alpines. It was literally a flip of the coin of which, so I went with Gasly.
Am I in some sort of time dilation? Because that was typed into the document way before you said it. And I'm just worried about there's some audio issue going on. And it's
Don't worry about an audio issue, my friend. I literally kind of hovered over the keyboard and to see if I landed over G or O first, and it was G. So I just typed it as you were saying Piastri.
I was just looking at the list while you were doing that, and I also landed on Gasly. So I'm not going to let your choice influence me. I'm going to stick with Gasly.
Okay. Right, number of finishes. I think, generally speaking, we'll probably be all right here. Reliability looks good. It's going to come down to on-track issues, I think, more than anything. So I'm going to go...
drain covers coming off. And
things like drain covers or renegade drivers. So I'm going to go...
rookies on the grid.
I'm going to go 18 for this one.
That's a strong guess. Who's next?
Either of you. You fight out amongst yourselves.
Do you have a number in mind, Chris?
I didn't. It was 18, but in the interest of not having two categories the same as Tom, I'm going to go really confident and say 19.
19? Okay, I'll go 17 then.
Okay, that solves that one. In the theme of tonight's show, can you give us a random driver, Chris? And then I'll guess it, and then you can say, yeah, that's what I was going to do.
Random drivers Esteban Ocon.
Ooh.
Ouch. 18th. He's last on the road. Gaz is already out. 18. Done.
19th. I think he's the second DNF.
Ooh.
I'll go slightly better then and say 17th.
So
poor Esteban.
You've got him finishing ahead of other cars. Wow. You are a bold man. This is gonna
Someone's-
this is gonna bite me and Stu in the ass so much when they're in like Q3 and pushing for
It's
decent
going to bite
points.
everybody when they've
Well,
been
yeah, actually.
sandbagging harder than anyone's ever sandbagged, and they've got a rocket ship.
Oh God. I mean, that's just not going to be the case. I'd be so shocked.
It's not. I'd be very surprised if that is the case.
I want to change your predictions to Ocon winner, Ocon pole, Ocon first, the fastest. No.
Okay.
Right. And that is us done. So if you want to get involved, as I said before, head to backtothegrid.com. Information for all this there and the fantasy leagues. Couple of bits of inbox before we go, gents.
Yep.
Is keep it saying now. Stay out. Box. Hey man.
Paul D says, "Hey man, do you think Ferrari extended Charles' contract too soon? There hasn't been much between him and Carlos in previous seasons. If Carlos is quickest of the two this season, they regret their decision? Well, they will if my fantasy comes true, won't they?
Yeah.
Yeah,
It would be a potential. I was going to say it would be a red face if that happens, but it wouldn't, because I feel like they'd tie themselves in knots to make excuses for Leclerc, because he is their golden boy.
Yeah.
I don't know if they extended his contract too soon. I think the length of the extension they gave him was maybe a bit short-sighted, given...
Does anyone even know what
contracts.
length of contract they've given Leclerc? Just
It's-
multi-year was what I read. They were really secretive about it.
Yeah, but
think-
didn't he already had another 2 years to go, and they've extended on that by multiple years? So in theory, that leaves him with at least 4 seasons
So 4
after this. I
years,
think.
yeah.
I
That's
think
long
that
time.
mathematically works out. I
Officially,
think it
it's
keeps
just-
him in the car officially until 2028, basically. I think the way it would work out.
It's
sure
similar
someone
to the
correct me,
one
but-
Verstappen's got, I think, because Verstappen's
Yeah.
got a crazy long one, hasn't he?
Okay.
Yeah.
But we don't know.
We don't know
We
for
don't know.
certain. Yeah, Verstappen's there until the end of 2028 as well.
Oh,
I
we know that.
suspect Leclerc.
But we truthfully, we don't actually know how long.
Truthfully, we don't
Leclerc's
know.
past. Yeah.
I mean, it
but
might not be there past the end of 2025, depending on what Hamilton does when he goes there.
I mean, if Hamilton turns up and makes Leclerc look like the driver Stu's been claiming he is for the last couple of years, then it's going to be very embarrassing for Ferrari. But that's it. That's a year off yet.
Yeah. Next one.
Other question this week from Nit234: Is Alpine actually in trouble?
Yes.
Yes.
Absolutely yes. Guaranteed.
Yeah,
They're getting sold. They're getting sold to Chevrolet, Cadillac, or whoever it is.
because they're in such a weird place now, because I've had all these big name investors come on board, so they've got a lot of people to answer to now. But I really just can't see how much longer the Renault board are gonna be interested in spending money on this, because it's just not achieving anything.
Yeah.
So yeah, if nothing else, it may well be a route in for Andretti.
Let's hope so.
And I think that's probably enough for a podcast this week. Thank you, as ever, for joining us. As Tom said, if you want to take a look at the Predictions League or either of the fantasy leagues, you can go to backofthegrid.com to find out all about that. Please don't forget that the Grand Prix this weekend is on Saturday, not Sunday.
Ooh.
So predictions will be closing for qualifying, which is, I believe, 4:00 on Friday evening UK time.
Yeah.
It is,
Thanks,
yes.
F1. Thanks for that.
Yeah. I'm going to see almost nothing live this weekend for the first round of the season, which is great. Thanks,
Just shows
everyone.
us how excited you are for this season of Formula One.
If you want to get in touch, Instagram, Facebook, X, Twitter, whatever that's called, all of those things. You can also go to patreon.com/backofthegrid to find out how you can get involved with our Discord, where you can join our nice little community we have there. You can listen to live recordings of the episodes, all of that good stuff. And I think that's it. So we'll be back in a week's time to talk about the first Grand Prix of the 2024 season. Let's hope for a very exciting one. But until then, thanks again for joining us, and goodbye.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.